Okay, so how do we believe this world will look like? And three main arguments on my side. So first I will tell you, about data, of course, then I will tell you about monopolization of the market. And finally, I will tell you about the responsibility before users that those companies will have. But first of all, how the world will actually look like. We believe that this kind of free advertisement-based services started in the first decade of 21st century, and we believe that if they haven't started, if they haven't started like that, probably vast majority of main companies would still be payment-based, right? Like we had before with other social networks, for example. But so we believe that Facebook, for example, or Google Plus, or anything like that, or Instagram would be payment-based. We still believe that there would be some small social media catering to people being not advertisement-based, but because of the fact that the main ones would be payment-based, we believe that this is the one that people would use, etc., right? So coming on to my arguments. First about the fact that we don't know what kind of data it takes and why is this important. So we believe that because loads of people use those kind of advertisement-based stuff in the status quo, we believe that it is very likely that you as a user will consent to everyone that this service is asked you to do. So for example, to collect loads of your data, where you are, what you like, who do you like, etc., right? We believe that this is very likely, first of all, because everyone uses it, so you don't want to miss out, etc. And second of all, because if you don't pay for something, you are less likely to just check the terms and conditions. And the terms and conditions itself are likely to be very, very convoluted and difficult to read for you as an average person, because those services want you to accept those terms and conditions, and you are more likely to accept them if they're very long and you don't want to read them, etc., etc. We believe that in our world, this is way different. So first of all, probably the companies don't collect your data as much. Why is that? They don't need it because they don't need money from from people who are advertising stuff, right? They have the money to run the service from you because you are paying them to run their service. Second of all, they are probably less likely to collect this data because if they collect so much data, you are less likely to consent to it, right? We believe that in the world we are proposing, there is less likely, you are less likely to those companies are less likely to collect your data. They are more likely to make those terms and conditions clear that you can read it, because maybe if you don't read it or don't understand them, you don't want to pay them for whatever you are using, right? So we believe that not only you are more likely to read them and understand them, but also companies are more likely to make them clear. Why is that important? Note that collecting our data in the past has led to bad things and probably will lead to bad things in the future. So note that first of all, our data being collected without our knowledge, or technically with our knowledge because we consented, but we don't really know how it is collected, leads to those advertisement-based services advertising us stuff to make us behave in a concrete way, right? This means that people and advertisement companies that have money are likely to influence how you will lead your life. This happened in the US election. Obviously, this is the most clear example that we can give you here. But it's also happening on basic, like, daily things that you are likely to buy things that are not necessities, etc., because those companies are constantly catering in advertisement to you, and without your knowledge, advertising things that you are more likely to buy, even if you don't need to, because they can make advertisement very, very easy for you. So second thing that is happening, I believe, is the monopolization of the market of those kind of social media stuff, right? So how is it happening? So if it's free and loads of people are joining, right, because it is very easy to join, the base for joining is very, very low, you just have to click yes, then probably it is more likely that those companies will rise very, very fast, right? If you have to pay for something, you are more likely to, first of all, think, do you need it at all, right? Do you need fifth social media in your life in that moment? You are also more likely to check that, as I said, check the terms and conditions and stuff, and probably not pay for all of those. So we all have Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Tinder, etc., because we are not paying for those. We don't have Spotify, Apple Music, and 5 other streaming services because we would have to pay for those, even though we can connect with friends there, exchange music, etc., right? We only have one. That's why we probably believe that it is less likely that the monopolization will happen, because you will choose the media or the company that is most helpful to you in that particular moment, right? We believe that monopolization is bad because then those companies can influence all of our lives in a very bad and big manner. And second of all, probably they can stand the terms and conditions as they wish so and expand, for example, the data they collect. Is there any question? No, great.
Yes.
So that's why we believe, the monopolization is bad. So finally, the last thing that we have to you is the more responsibility before users. So why is that? We believe that if those companies will have more responsibility before users, because just users pay them, right? If you pay them, they are more likely to actually have responsibility in front of before you, instead of before advertisement providers that they do have responsibility before in the status quo, right? Why is this important? We believe that this is extremely important in cases when something bad happens to you on those businesses, on those services. Let's say, I don't know, revenge porn or anything like that, or hate speech towards you. We believe that those companies are more likely to do something about it if they have clear responsibility before you. Furthermore, you are more likely to actually report that or do something about it, because probably it is much more clear written why and how can you do that when something bad happens to you. We believe that it is extremely important for just comfortability of the users. And more on that, Matti. Thank you.
Then without further ado, we'd like to give the floor to the leader of the opposition. Here.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah, nice. Just a second.
Sure.
Mr. Speaker, I think what we have in the status quo, that it allows a lot of access to the people who need that space. And what we're going to assert to you, that the business model provided by the opening government is a bad one. And but before that, just a few points of rebuttal. Firstly, they assert to us that people buy stuff that they don't need, and that they would stop to do that otherwise because they don't see any kind of ads. We don't see any kind of a big. I don't think that it's a big problem, because like when people do buy stuff on our side of the house, they can do it faster. They just they have more time to. They don't have to search for anything because the system already adjusts for their search history. So we don't see why necessarily it is bad. It is bad. So probably this argument works for the people who cannot resist any kind of ad, which are unlikely to be changed on both sides of the house, because people still watch TV. There are stuff outside the cyberspace. For example, when they go out and walk, people approach them and ask to buy the stuff. So we don't think that's a big of a problem. Regarding the monopolization, we don't think it's also a problem, because people in the status quo enjoy Instagram, Facebook. Even if it is owned by just one company, people still have a lot of quality service, and that they do enjoy their time there. So no harms so far. But one harm that they point out is that there are kind of revenge porns, and alternatively there would be far more responsibility towards consumers. We don't think that's a problem as well, because in the status quo, Facebook has a lot of incentive to moderate that kind of content. For example, there are thousands of Facebook employees who filter that kind of information out regarding violence, regarding revenge porns. So even if this kind of information is exposed, which is likely to be exposed on both sides of the house, we still have Facebook even might have more money to moderate that kind of content on our side of the house, since they can afford to hire more people due to the revenue from the ads. So we think this problem is better solved on our side of the house. So a little bit, so the one crucial mistake that opening government does, they never clarify what would be the price and the cost of that companies. We think incentive to enrich themselves from companies like Facebook will stay on both sides of the house. That means in order to have a lot of money, they would still have to, the price would be relatively higher. Even if it is a Netflix who has a $10 subscription base, we see like people can choose to not to spend that money on Google subscription in order to have Google. They would have to sacrifice and feed their families less. They have to buy less fuel to their cars, and they can access less. They cannot access their job. So a lot of people would simply choose not to use that kind of services. That means most parts of the world, services like Google, Facebook, significantly less accessible. And why this is important? There are three consequences that come from that. Firstly, we say far less social advocacy on their side of the house, because people cannot gather and share information that is needed to meet and to protest, for example, because firstly, because it is expensive, and secondly, the alternative on their side of the house is probably local Google's, local Facebooks, which are probably controlled by the government, and that means, like, for example, Yandex in Russia. That means people cannot mobilize and improve their lives. Like this is literally a case for the Arab Spring, where they ousted the autocratic leaders, and even in far less extreme instances, for example, they cannot raise awareness on issues like rape, harassment, the stuff that is actually acute throughout the world. So we think the scope of the movements like Me Too is far less on their side of the house, and like the awareness from social advocates in Kazakhstan, in India, is also far less on their side of the house. That means people continue to suffer on their side of the house because they do not have platform to gather and to protest. So this is far more tangible harm that we get from the opening government. Second thing that happens, we say the interconnectedness of the world is also decreased on their side of the house. That means due to the limited access, we cannot invite Rafi Marshall to teach at our debate academy, because we can simply not, we have to buy the subscription, we have to text and we have to spend money, which we probably already have less, and we cannot like invite speakers to speak about social issues like certain advocates at our university, and it's far more difficult to access people outside of your country, and that means the amount of changes and the exposure to the different kind of opinions is also far more less on their side of the house. Before I move on to the third impact, I want to take a POI if there is any. Okay, so the third consequences of the limited access, we say most of the information that is available and valuable information is actually would be restricted on their side of the house. Because in the status quo, one key feature that we have regarding Facebook, Google, and the other platforms that use that ad-based revenue models, because there are more people. It means it is more likely to be reliable because there are more people to check that information. For example, thousands of people work on Wikipedia, they check and edit the information. And this is important because in a lot of instances, autocracies or like the bad governments have incentive to cover up certain kind of information regarding Tiananmen Square or your own history, a certain massacre, and like how minorities history in your country and what they have done to you. So government may lie to you and polarize that kind of societies. And that kind of information is uniquely accessible through the platforms like Google that are independent and even if not completely independent, this is far more better than the alternative on their side of the house. That is the local, local search and the local social media companies. We think this is far more less access and far more less information on their side of the house. And just people do not know the history of their country, and they do not know what to believe and how to treat the people around them. This gets better on our side of the house. Access is important, and that's why we are very proud to stand on opening a position. Thank you.
would like to thank the speaker for the fine speech, and now give the floor to the Deputy Prime Minister. Here.
All right, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, I can hear you.
All right, tons of rebuttal. First of all, they are saying that ads are not necessarily bad. Note A, that they influence your behavior in a ways that you cannot necessarily predict or want. Why is that so? Because A, you don't know how these ads play out, why you have ads for specific stuff that is appearing. Second of all, because of the power of suggestion that constantly many things are reappearing in your newsfeed or whatever, these are the things that influence your behavior of what to buy, but also what to follow, right? What kind of lifestyle you have to pursue. This is really valuable, specifically because it closes you into a chamber that this is specific way of life that you're supposed to pursue. But second of all, that you need that specific product even if you don't. Second of all, they are saying, well, Me Too movement and Rafi Marshall. For every Me Too movement, there is a Rohingya genocide. For every Rafi Marshall, there is Jordan Peterson that is spreading their ideas. So they cannot assume that interconnectedness of the world is necessarily good. Note in itself, social justice as a Me Too movement and as a spillover effect on every user of a Facebook was not necessarily good because it opened the possibility of the trolls, opened possibility for denying rights of people who actually came forward with Me Too movement. We would rather see social justice play out at the top level with in the media, with popular people talking about those stuff, rather than on the every user level with it being necessarily scrutinized. They are also saying, well, we are losing out on mobilization and stuff like that. We are saying that still you have access to the internet, you have access to things like forums in which you can discuss stuff. Maybe mobilization will be less, but note that this mobilization also takes from the things that are happening in a bad way, like Rohingya genocide on WhatsApp, like far-right movements on Facebook. So we are okay with that kind of wash, as long as you still have opportunity to mobilize in the forums, but you have less bad stuff happening. Also, we believe that you have things like demo and limited version of Google, etc., in which you can use it to a certain extent if you want to be interconnected and stuff like that. Also, we believe that you still have an internet, right? So even if your government is blocking you certain amounts of channels, we believe that you still have fair access to the information if you're actually searching for it. We believe it is better that you are actually searching it within the gray area of the internet, when you can search for specific stuff, rather than if you are put it on the Facebook in certain echo chamber, which you cannot escape from when those constant articles are reappearing for you. We also believe that this is very bad for far right to mobilize, right? Because they are likely to mobilize on the internet via spreading of ideas like Jordan Peterson, etc., etc. That means that you have possibly more violence happening. That means that you have possibly more bad stuff happening. They are saying that Facebook right now has incentive to block that content. Note it didn't have incentive for vast amount of time during which bad stuff were happening. Just because it is blocking it right now doesn't mean it is blocking effectively, and B, doesn't mean that it is blocking all of it. We are saying that on our side of the house, you don't have that kind of big players in the first place. That means that you don't have that much. You don't have to have that much of a manpower in order to block that content, because you have that because you have many different services that are divided, that people are specifically asking and entering into. So that means that basically you don't have to have that much of a people working on it if it is divided. Second of all, we believe that if you are paying for subscription, you are likely as a big company to have that power in the first place. You are likely to be responsive to users and what they actually expect of you that being blocked most of the bad content, that being that probably you will have that filter put in the place. We are saying about, and going back to the responsibility that I was talking about, we are saying that if you have an obligation before specific users, that being actually them reporting on the problems that you don't want to lose a paid subscription, you don't want to lose money, ergo you're likely to cater to them, you're much more likely to listen to them, right? Because they are your support base when it comes to running the platform. That means that you are much more likely to actually censor the content that is needed. I will take POI right now if anyone has. No? All right. Second of all, you are much more likely to have platforms dependent on clickbait. This is very important because clickbaits are the means of spreading misinformation, are the means of spreading things that people click and not necessarily knowing what they are entering to, what kind of information is given to them. We believe that this is very, very bad when advertisement-based companies are onto it, because they probably have to do it in order to increase their views. We are seeing on our side of the house, clickbaits are not happening when you have to satisfy users. Clickbaits are the means of spreading false information, and we don't want to foster it. Second of all, we believe that informations that are roaming around the Facebook are in some ways fake news, are in some way false informations. We are saying that those fake news and false informations are unlikely to be spread on smaller platforms when you can actually report, when you can actually easily delete it, rather than from Facebook when it's gaining huge popularity, it actually spreads to a vast amount of people. Last part on innovations. We are saying that in the status quo, you are likely to get rid of innovations because you have platform that monopolizes all of it. On our side of the house, you have a competition that is, and you have innovation that comes into place and is not necessarily bought out in 3 seconds by Google, but can actually run freely and deliver goods to the people. Thank you.
We'd like to speak for the final speech, and I'll give the floor to the Deputy Leader of the Opposition. Please take into account if you want to ask you. I think at some point that this debate has happened, make sure you turn on your microphone again, because I think it was still muted. Without further ado, here for the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
So there are 2 things that I want to talk about. First, on access, and second, on how markets operate as a monopolization on all of this stuff. First, on access. Let's just get clear. They say on OG side they have many genocides, like Rohingya genocide. And on our side of the house, you have many good stuff, like problems, minorities problems getting increasing the awareness, etc., and those problems and life saved on our side also. So why opening opposition still win? Because I think that the bad stuff that happens on OG sites, that's say far-right movements, etc., are certainly regulated by Facebook. That's say if you're asking people and increasing awareness about genocide, it will be banned by Facebook, because everybody understands that genocide is bad and prohibited. And therefore, asking for genocide is extremely limited in Facebook, because it's in closed communities, and therefore, the number of those cases are much less. And on our side of the house, good things happening, because on our side of the house, when minorities ask about their problems, you do not ban them, but people listen to them, and therefore, on our side of the house, many people say and problems are listened to, and therefore, Rohingya genocide wasn't actually spread by Facebook, but incentivized by the government itself. And therefore, we believe that on our side of the house, there are much more positive things than on the side of the OG. Second, let's talk about data here. That the only reason why it's bad to collect this data is because conditions are too long and people don't really read them. I think it's very bad from OG to blame companies, not the people, for not reading the conditions. I think that people here made their decision. Yes, maybe some of them didn't read those conditions, but all of this awareness and how those things will operate in the future exist and are written. And therefore, I think that the blame should be put on the people, but not on the social media. And therefore, we believe this is the actual choice. And OG never proves to you why in those instances it's so bad that those conditions are hard to read. And therefore, I think that OG fails to prove why even such choice isn't bad. I think on opening opposition side, we still have choices of people. But beside that, we still have instances like Cambridge Analytica, after which there is a strong incentive of those social medias not to sell this information or to be very careful. Let's say all eyes of the population are stuck on those Facebook and other companies. And also there is a strong awareness coming from the population what data is collected for and how this data is used, because after such instances as Cambridge Analytica, all those things happen. Like, about talking about data, Nurlan already said that there is a strong positive side of this, because your interests are met best. You meet the best opportunities that you want to have. Let's say on the side of the opening governments, one, they have to prove why this choice is bad. But second, we go on our side of the house, we still have a strong benefit that comes from our choice being ignored and our preference being collected. However, if we talk about awareness and if we talk about getting out of the bubble, I think on our side of the house, it happens much more. Why is that? They talk about US election and stuff like that. I think there is on both sides of the house, the bubble of information, and on both sides of the house, a strong lobbyism of one-sided information. That's say in democratic countries, feel like Democratic Party still ignores taxes because it's a red state, and therefore people in those states do not get this information. People in authoritarian governments still do not get this information, and there is still strong closed communities that they live in, and therefore they do not get the information provided. On the side of the house, there is the one-sided information, and therefore people don't have access on OG side, even if they don't have like lobbyism by advertisement, etc. However, on our side of the house, you have a way out. Let's say you have an access to social movements to give this awareness, to give this information. Here, note, they say there's still internet that will exist and there will still be internet connection, and therefore people can have access for that. I think, firstly, it's very important to social movements to be massive, because if you're not massive, nobody will hear to you, nobody will listen to you, and therefore on our side of the house, those benefits are unique, because when OG has small social networks, nobody can mobilize, nobody will listen to them. But secondly, though, we already proved to you that many things will be paid, many things will be paid, and note, those minorities that have many problems do not have this money to pay. That's say the most vulnerable are ignored, the most needed are lost in the access that they need, and therefore on our side of the house, those unique benefits still stay. So in the end, like when we talk about access, there are much more benefits than harms that coming from the opening opposition, and therefore we believe that access is a good thing. Second, let's talk about Facebook's work and all the monopolization. I think OGs, the main reason that OG gives you is that there's easy access to people, and therefore so monopolization happens. I think that easy access is relevant not only to Facebook, but also to other companies. That's say all those companies have a benefit of easy access. That's say people can easily access your company. So why did Facebook monopolize it? Is because they have best instruments. No, they had best instruments to achieve it. They had most money, and in both worlds they have those best instruments, and therefore in both worlds they can achieve the monopoly. And we know that Facebook will achieve this monopoly in both sides of the house, and OG fails to prove why it won't happen again. And we believe that this argument still stands on our side of the house. And therefore we believe Nurlan, talking about responsibility, also Nurlan already proved to you that companies pay much more money to Facebook when Facebook have some viewers, have some people that use Facebook, and Facebook also not only like will monopolize in both worlds, but secondly though will have this responsibility in both worlds also, because everybody is important for them, because they get paid, okay, not from people but from companies that give them money. Let's say at the end of this debate, we believe that there are many stuff that is irrelevant to this debate that happen in both worlds from OG. However, many good stuff that prevail in the opening half of this debate, therefore proud to oppose.
We'd like to thank the speaker for the fine speech. And
what I said was thank you all for what I thought was a pretty high quality debate. I'm just going to give you the goal and give you the explanation. If there are any questions, feel free to ask them or text me. I can also send some feedback afterwards. Feel free to find me on Facebook. My name is Daan Spackler, so you can find me. I ultimately decided to give the first to opening opposition, the second to closing opposition, third to opening government, and the fourth to closing government. The 2-3 was the closest within this debate. So another panel might have made a different decision, but this is mine. Cool. Let's start with top half and how I think that OO takes out OG. So I think that OG gives broadly 3 interesting ideas. They firstly outline that they take out data, which I think was pretty well analyzed why this is the case and why this would not happen under the counterfactual. I do think, though, that more impacting was necessary there as to why we think it's such a bad thing when companies take data. Because I think that both the opposition teams do very well mitigation towards that point. Because I think the main impact that OG derives from that is it can change your behavior in terms of what kind of products you're going to buy and that stuff. The other example that I think was less well developed is the idea of the US election. Please explain me why specifically these data will lead to the impacts that you derive from this. Because I think that with the point of how it makes you buy different products, I'm not necessarily sure why this is such a bad thing. And I think both opposition teams do a clever job by pointing out that, okay, but you probably bought products anyway. Why is it such a bad thing if you buy? I think what's more interesting then is the point of how this makes social media develop. And I think this nicely clashes within top. Because opening government gives the explanation of, look, there are monopolies happening at the moment that one company is for free, gathers the data, therefore it's likelier that all of us go on Facebook. I think that opening opposition takes out this point pretty well by saying, okay, but at the moment that people enjoy this, why is monopoly forming is such a bad thing in itself? I do think they give clever analysis as to people still enjoying, regardless of it being a monopoly, and even if it's true and it's being owned by one company. I'm not really sure why that's a bad thing. I think the response coming from that is okay, but it leads to more news coming up there. I think that the examples of the Rohingya in Myanmar was a bit far-fetched because I'm a bit unsure why this is a thing that specifically happens. Because of the way that the algorithms work, I think the opening opposition does pretty well responses towards that in explaining that, okay, but Facebook will still ban those things and will still be limited on Facebook. I do think that's mostly mitigatory material. I'm not really sure whether it takes the full point out. So ultimately, I do believe that opening government, their material is still standing something about the responsibility that Facebook has. I do believe that's comparatively better. I'm not necessarily sure why it weighs up against the impacts that opening opposition did. Because on the point of how Facebook and comparable media would develop, they give some very clever ideas. They say, look, at the moment that you don't have the advertised-based, it is likely that it will result into higher prices for consumers. I think that's fair. They at least make it pretty intuitive and it doesn't really get refuted. I think the impacts that derive from that are pretty clear. I think on the social cohesion, I do think I believe to a large extent that cohesion will happen. I do think opening opposition could have done more work in the point of how protests like the Arab Spring and the Me Too movement could have occurred. I do think they make it intuitive. I'm not really sure whether they get proven to full extent. I do think that works better on the point of interconnectedness and yes, basically that. I think on top of that, they gave a point of the valuable info that's being restricted. I do think that nicely clashes within the top half. The information that gets restricted by autocratic governments, I do think they give good explanation why you now get different questions, even if some of them are clickbait, and it's still better. Weighing off the why data is being taken away, and probably that the platform would have changed to a certain extent. However, I'm unsure why they should care for that much. Whereas I do believe that opening opposition gives me tangible impacts about how this will lead to better social cohesion and all the impacts derived from that. Therefore, opening up beats opening up. Cool. Taking in closing government. I think closing government has a pretty interesting idea for the extension, in which they explain that it will lead to monopoly forming and the behavior of consumers in a different way than opening government does. What do? They explain that because the data is taken away, taking off the data point of opening government, it is likelier that you're going to monopolize. However, the reason that I don't think it takes it over opening government is, for one, I do think more analysis is needed on the data, why that leads to a situation in which people will only buy that product. Therefore, I'm unsure why the monopoly is formed to a certain extent. Because I also think that both government teams point out, both opposition teams point out, look, but you will still probably buy products. Then why is it such a bad thing if you buy this product over another one? Well, the response that closing government gives is you need to have better strategies to improve your product. But I'm not sure why those two are mutually exclusive. Like, why can't you both actually improve your product as such when you also have the data of those people? I think more analysis was needed there to explain why the products were getting comparatively worse under the advertisement-based business models. Therefore, I do believe that the impacts that opening government gives us about the development of social media are still standing at the end of the debate, whereas I'm unsure why the monopolizing of the product is a thing that that harms people so much. Therefore, I do believe that open government takes the edge. Well, in terms of the diagonal, given the way that BEP works, they already fall below opening opposition there. But I also believe that's the point that opening opposition makes earlier on about, even if monopolies are formed, why is that a bad thing at the moment that people enjoy it? Also is a very well preemptive response to the material that closing government brings in. Therefore, they also take that. Taking in closing opposition. I think probably the hardest thing to weigh in this debate, but still a very clever case. Because what closing opposition does is broadly three things. Firstly, they explain that in the retrospect of this debate, it has led to more buy-in to social media and other kinds of business models, meaning that more people buy in, meaning that Facebook develops in a better way, people can host events, that kind of stuff. I think then, to that extent, I believe it. I'm not really sure whether I believe that it will lead to more buy-in in the internet. I do think that link was not really well explained as to why more buy-in to Facebook also necessarily leads to more buy-in to the internet as a whole. I do believe it's cheaper, but I'm not really sure why that leads to that buy-in. Secondly, they take a lot of the points from opening government, but flip them. For example, the point of the information, what I think the closing opposition does really well, is explaining, okay, but even if we have clickbait and that kind of stuff, that's as good as the information is going to get. Meaning that that on the information clash, I do believe that closing opposition gives a very well explanation as to why we at least get now more information, even if that information is comparatively less good than when you had to buy in, because those people probably won't buy in the first place, given the material that they give of more only rich people doing it. I think third thing they do is explanation on the information, specifically in autocratic regimes. I do think that has some extra analysis compared. That's new and that well elaborated. It takes over. Taking then the op-bench and how did I weigh that? I do think that closing opposition adds a lot of things in terms of how the interest works and how Facebook gets better as a whole. But the whole reasoning as to why we think that Facebook is such a good thing is contingent material on opening opposition, because I think that opening opposition does the work in explaining why we actually want Facebook to become bigger. I think that they actually are the ones that give the explanation of the interconnectedness of the social cohesion of the valuable info. I think that closing opposition then gives extra characters in the train of thought of that opening opposition does. It doesn't really explain them that much better, nor do they really weigh it up to that point. And because I do think that opening opposition does give that way of preemptively, closing opposition does not really make that way off. I think on those two grounds, opening opposition takes the edge. So in terms of the long diagonal, I already alluded to this a bit. I do think that closing opposition does really well refuting material to opening government in the whole idea of news probably gets better, clickbait not being such a bad thing, and on the data probably being retrieved elsewhere. I do believe that they also win on that diagonal. Briefly on the back half, I already gave some explanation on closing government there. I do think that closing opposition points out pretty well how the monopoly forming is probably happening under both sides of the house, if not, probably not being such a bad thing. I also think they take out the principle pretty well, although I'm not really convinced that the principle was really made, it was really proven in first place. So that's basically the call. Are there any questions regarding this call? If not, if you want any feedback, I think I'm gonna have to go to lunch right now. Yeah, time zones. Feel free to just text me on Facebook if you want feedback. My name is Daan Spackler. I will type it in the chat how it's spelled. I wish you the best of luck if you're going to do more debates, and good luck with the road to Euros, I'd say.